What would you do if a starving woman collapsed at your gate and whispered she would work without pay just for a place to stay? Would you turn your back or open a door you promised never to open again? The wind roared down from the northern plains as if the whole sky had come loose. Dust swirled in angry circles, scratching the earth and clawing at anything standing in its path. In the middle of that storm walked Norah Bellamy. Her bonnet was torn, her dress coated in dirt, and her steps dragged like her boots were filled with stones. She had been walking so long she no longer knew the difference between hours and days. Her lips were cracked, her throat dry, but she kept moving toward the only shape she could still see through the dust. Thorn Ranch. The carved wooden sign hung crooked on the gate, half buried in dust. Norah reached for it, her fingers trembling. She leaned against the wooden post just to stay standing. Her voice came out thin and broken. "Please, someone." The front door of the ranch house creaked open. A tall man stepped onto the porch, Gage Thorne. Broad shoulders, dust-worn coat, a hat pulled low over eyes that saw more than he ever said. He didn't speak, he didn't move. He only watched her through the storm, his face unreadable. Norah tried to take another step, but her body gave out. She fell to her knees in the dirt, hands sinking into the dry earth. "I'll work," she gasped. "I'll work without pay. Just let me stay." Her words were swept away by the wind. Gage's jaw clenched. He had heard promises before, from people who looked desperate but carried trouble. Once, long ago, he had opened his door to a stranger. Because of that, his wife and daughter never saw another sunrise. So, he turned away. "We don't take in strangers here," he said, his voice flat and cold. Norah tried to breathe, but her body shook too hard. Her vision blurred. The storm swallowed her as she collapsed face down in the dirt. For a long heartbeat, Gage stood frozen on the porch. The part of him that still felt anything at all screamed to walk away. But something deeper held him still, something he thought had died with the 2 wooden crosses behind his barn. He cursed under his breath and ran. The wind slammed against him as he pushed through the storm, knelt beside her and lifted her into his arms. Her skin was cold, her breath barely there. She weighed almost nothing. He carried her inside like a man carrying a fragile thing he wasn't sure how to hold anymore. Inside the house, the fire crackled weakly. Gage laid her on the old sofa by the hearth, covered her with the blanket that still held the faint scent of cedar. For a long time he didn't look away from her face. The storm screamed outside the windows, but inside, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall and her weak, uneven breathing. He told himself she wouldn't survive the night. He told himself it wasn't his fault if she didn't. But he stayed awake anyway. By morning, the ranch lay quiet under a pale sunrise. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed and still. Gage stepped into the main room expecting to find her too weak to move. Instead, he stopped dead in the doorway. Norah Bellamy was standing by the open door, a needle and thread in her hand, sewing up a broken section of his fence like she had lived on this land her whole life. Her cheeks held a faint color now. Her eyes were tired, but clear. She had rolled up her sleeves and braided her hair back neatly. On the stove, a pot of coffee simmered. Gage stared. "You shouldn't be up." "I told you," she replied gently without looking at him. "I'll work without pay. You're no ranch hand." "No," she said, turning toward him with a tired smile. "But I can learn. And your fence looked like it needed help." He didn't know what to say. No one had touched that fence since the night the fire took everything from him. By noon, she had cooked a simple breakfast. Eggs, biscuits, and beans she found in his pantry. Gage stood awkwardly by the door, not sure how to exist in a house that finally felt alive again. Her humming filled the kitchen, soft and warm, like sunlight after a long winter. He watched her hands as she worked. Every movement was gentle, careful, grateful. She moved with the quiet grace of someone who had spent her whole life being told to stay small, yet still carried a heart strong enough to rebuild something broken, his house, and maybe, he feared, something inside him too. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Bo Callan rode up the path, dust rising behind his horse. He stepped onto the porch, eyebrows raised at the sight of company. "Didn't expect you to take someone in, Thorne?" Bo said kindly. "She's just passing through," Gage replied quickly. Norah folded her hands, eyes lowered. Bo tilted his head. "Funny. Place looks more alive than I've seen it in years." Gage shot him a warning glare. The sheriff only chuckled. When Bo rode off, Norah stood by the hearth, the fire lighting her face. She looked stronger now, but still carried that quiet sadness, like someone used to leaving before she could belong. "You can stay until the end of the week," Gage said gruffly. She met his eyes. "And after that?" He swallowed. He didn't know the right answer, only the honest one. "We'll see." Quote, that night, as Gage sat on the porch staring at the moonlit valley, he heard Norah humming softly inside. Her voice wrapped around the quiet ranch like a gentle hand. He told himself she would leave soon, but deep inside, he already knew. Something had changed. What happens when the past you ran from finally finds you? And what happens when the one person who saved you is the one now standing in danger because of your truth? The days after the storm passed quietly on Thorn Ranch, but nothing felt the same anymore. The house that once sat silent now carried the sound of Norah's soft humming, the scrape of a broom across old floors, and the steady rhythm of work she did from dawn till dusk. Gage tried to convince himself she was temporary, just a traveler passing through, but the ranch didn't look temporary anymore. It looked lived in, cared for, and every time he passed a window, he caught himself looking for the flash of her auburn hair or listening for that quiet hum. By the end of the week, the ranch had changed so much that even Gage barely recognized it. The hearth glowed every evening. The floors no longer carried years of dust. The curtains were mended and tied back, letting sunlight through windows that hadn't seen more than shadow in years. And beside that chipped jar on the table, filled with wildflowers she had picked at sunrise, stood Norah, soft, steady, a quiet kind of strong that he didn't know how to stay away from. Gage tried to keep distance, but the ranch kept pulling them together. One afternoon, he returned from the ridge road with a sack of nails and a coil of rope. He stopped dead in his tracks. Norah was standing inside the corral, brushing down a skittish mare that everyone in town called half-wild. A horse that had kicked two men clean off their feet and bit anyone who came within reach, but the mare stood still under Norah's touch. "You'll get yourself kicked," Gage called out, unable to hide the edge in his voice. Norah turned with that soft smile. "Not if she knows I won't hurt her." Gage walked closer, stunned at how the mare leaned into Norah's hand. He stared at her, not the horse, but Norah. There was something in her he hadn't seen in years. Something gentle enough to calm the broken, something brave enough to stand unafraid in front of scars, whether on a horse or on a man. By the time evening fell, the ranch felt like it had breathed again. But word travels fast in Sage Hollow. Too fast. When Gage rode into town that Friday, the whispers followed him through the saloon like dust on boots. "So Thorne, got yourself a woman up there now?" Stray must be after his land. Man like him gets lonely enough he'd take in a fox if it knocked. Laughter circled the room. Gage stood still, gloves in hand, jaw tight. He let the silence stretch until the laughter cracked. Then he said in a low voice, "She's working hard fixing what none of you ever had the guts to help with. You got something against that?" No one answered. Even Sheriff Bo Callan tilted his hat and muttered, "Leave it be, boys." By the time Gage rode back home, the whispers were dead, but something else was waiting. As he rode into the yard, he heard Norah laughing softly, the sound warm and rare. The half-wild mare grazed beside her like they had been friends all their lives. That small sight hit Gage harder than any shout or gunshot ever had. She had made this place breathe. He carried the supplies to the porch, trying to steady the strange feeling in his chest. Norah looked up. "You were gone longer than usual," she said. "Town needed reminding how to mind their own business." She paused. "They were talking about me, weren't they?" He hesitated. "They were." "And what did you say?" Gage swallowed. Enough. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that she tried to hide. Inside, the air smelled of stew and bread. They sat across from each other at the table, the firelight playing over their faces. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Gage said quietly, "I didn't thank you." "You don't need to." "I do," he said, "not for the chores. For the way this place feels again." Her breath caught. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer empty, but peace never lasts long in the West, not when someone is running from something. The next morning, the sound of hooves echoed across the yard, heavy, purposeful. Norah froze at the counter. Gage's jaw hardened. A lone rider approached, broad-shouldered, wearing a long leather duster. His smile was thin, his eyes cold. Jed Tarrant, a bounty man. Norah's face went pale. Jed tipped his hat. "Heard you got yourself a worker, Norah Bellamy. Turns out she's wanted. Theft, obstruction, and a missing lockbox of gold." Gage stepped forward. "Leave." Jed's smile widened. "Not without what's mine." Behind Gage, Norah whispered, "He's lying." Jed leaned his elbow on the saddle horn. "Paperwork says you're a thief, sweetheart. Sheriff in Canyon Hollow signed the warrant." Gage's voice dropped low. "I said leave." Jed laughed. "Careful, Thorne. Last time you stood between trouble and your door, well, the fire didn't end pretty, did it?" Quote. Gage's eyes darkened with something cold. He pulled his rifle off his shoulder. "You have, till I count 3. Quote. Jed saw something in Gage's face that changed his smile. He turned his horse and rode off. Not far, but far enough to plan. When he was gone, Norah stood trembling. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "He won't stop." "Then we deal with him," Gage said. She stepped closer, voice shaking. "You think I'm lying?" Gage didn't answer at first. The silence thickened until she wished he would shout instead. Finally he said, "If there's something I need to know, tell me now." That night, as rain pounded the roof, Norah told him everything. About her father, about the gold that was stolen, about the night Jed and his men came, about running for her life. Her voice was soft but fierce. "I never found the lockbox. I never stole a thing. They killed my father for it. They only want me quiet." Gage listened, fists clenched. When she finally looked up, he said, "You should have told me." She whispered, "Would you have let me stay?" Quote. The only answer was the storm howling outside. She looked at him through tears. "You've lost people too, haven't you?" "Yes," he said, "years ago." Their eyes met. 2 lives shaped by loss, standing on the edge of something neither was ready to name. By dawn, the storm had passed, but another one waited on the horizon. Jed was coming back. And this time, he wouldn't be alone. What would you do if the danger you ran from finally reached the one place that ever felt like home? Would you run again, or fight for the first time in your life? The sky over Thorn Ranch turned iron gray before dawn. The valley lay quiet, heavy with the promise of trouble. Inside the barn, Gage Thorne moved with slow, steady purpose. He checked each rifle shell one by one, the metal clicking softly in his hands. His face showed no fear, only a calm readiness that came from a past he never spoke of. Norah Bellamy stood in the doorway, the early morning light falling around her like a pale halo. Her dark hair hung loose over her shoulders, still damp from the rain. She watched him with wide eyes full of worry. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "Yes, I do," Gage said without looking up. "A man can only run from the world for so long before it rides straight to his door." Before she could speak again, hoofbeats echoed across the land, slow, heavy, coming closer. Sheriff Bo Callan rode into the yard, his raincoat dripping, his expression grim. "Morning, Thorne," he said. "Heard Jed's been gathering men inside the saloon all night. Says he's riding up here before noon, says he's taking what belongs to him." Norah's voice shook. "He means me." Bo nodded. "I can't hold him on talk alone. Not with that warrant. You might want to clear out while there's time." Gage rose to his full height, his voice hard as steel. This is my land. She's under my roof. If Gage Thorne comes for her, he'd better come ready." Bo studied Gage's face, then gave a slow, respectful nod. "Didn't expect any less from you." When the sheriff left, the yard fell silent again. Norah stepped closer to Gage, her hands trembling. "Why are you doing this for me?" He looked at her then, really looked, his eyes softening. "Because you brought life back to this place," he said. "And I won't let anyone take it away." A strange warmth filled her chest. She opened her mouth to speak, but at that moment, a sound cut through the air. A wild, distant cry. A horse's cry. Norah turned toward the hills and froze. She saw horses. 5 of them. Men riding hard across the ridge. Gage Thorne was leading them. Her heart dropped. Before Gage could reach her, Norah took off, running across the field. "Norah!" he shouted. But she didn't stop. She couldn't let him get hurt because of her. She ran up the ridge toward the old windmill, its broken blades creaking like ghosts. When she reached the top, the riders were already there. Jed's men surrounded her. Jed grinned as he swung down from his horse. "Well now," he said. "Saved us a trip." Norah backed up until her shoulders hit the windmill post. The cold wood pressed into her spine. "Where's the gold?" Jed asked. "Tell me, and maybe I won't bury you right here." "I don't have it," Norah said, her voice shaking but her eyes steady. "I never had it." Jed stepped closer. "Then I guess we dig until you remember." Quote. He grabbed her by the arm and shoved her to the ground. The dirt scraped her palms. The windmill groaned above them, sharp and eerie in the rising sun. Jed leaned down, his shadow falling over her. "This is where the Thorne family burned, you know. Shame to add another ghost." Norah's breath hitched. "You're a monster." Jed smiled. "And you're a ticket to a fortune." Then, a sound split the air. Hooves. Fast. Furious. Jed turned. Gage Thorne was riding up the hill like a storm breaking loose. His coat flapped behind him, his rifle in hand, his jaw set like carved stone. He didn't shout. He didn't warn. He fired. The first shot slammed into the dirt near Jed's boot, kicking dust into the air. The second shot clipped a man's hat clean off his head. Everything erupted. Jed's men spread out, rifles raised. Norah crawled behind the windmill post, heart pounding. The broken blades spun faster in the wind, screeching like metal ghosts. Gage dismounted, rolling behind a boulder, firing with deadly precision. A man rushed him. Gage took him down. Another circled wide. Gage swung, firing once more. Dust, smoke, wind, shouting. Jed yelled over the chaos, "You can't win this, Thorne. You lost everything once, remember?" Gage's voice cut through the storm. "Not again." Jed fired. The bullet grazed Gage's arm. Blood soaked his sleeve. But Gage didn't slow. He stepped out from behind the rock, rifle raised. For a moment, the world held still. The windmill creaked. Norah whispered his name. Jed's eyes went wide. The gunshot echoed across the valley. Jed stumbled, shock twisting across his face. He fell backward into the dust. The remaining men took one look at Gage, the fire in his eyes, the steady hands, and fled down the ridge, leaving their leader behind. Silence washed over Windmill Hill. The only sound was Norah's shaky breath. Gage dropped his rifle and rushed to her. She crawled toward him, tears cutting through the dirt on her cheeks. "You came for me," she whispered. He knelt, cupping her face in his rough hands. "I'll always come for you." She touched his bleeding arm, voice trembling. "You're hurt." Quote, "It's nothing," he said quietly. "You're the reason I'm still standing." Down the hill, Sheriff Callan and Ruthie Vale appeared on horseback, breathless as they looked at the scene. Bo took off his hat. "Looks like justice didn't need a badge today." Ruthie wiped her eyes. "Lord above, are you two all right?" Gage helped Norah to her feet, keeping her close. "It's over," he said softly. And it was. Days passed. The ranch healed. The valley breathed. The windmill on the hill turned slow and peaceful again. Norah was no longer hunted. The law cleared her name. Sheriff Callan brought papers proving she was free. One evening, Gage and Norah rode side by side toward the main gate, the same gate where she had once fallen to her knees. This time she sat tall in the saddle. "I never meant to stay," she said quietly. "I just wanted a chance to work." Gage smiled a little. "You did more than work. You brought life back to a place I thought was dead." She looked at him. "And you let me." He reached for her hand, fingers brushing hers. "Guess we saved each other," he said. She nodded. "That's what love is, isn't it?" Quote. The wind blew soft across the grass. The evening sun painted the world gold. Gage looked at the gate, the same gate he had kept shut for years. "I think I'll leave it open," he said. "Always." Norah smiled. "Then let's ride home, Mr. Thorne." He tipped his hat. "Home. I like the sound of that." They rode through the open gate together. The ranch behind them glowed warm with light, laughter, and life. Two souls who had once been lost now rode toward a home they built together. With open gates, open hearts, and a future worth fighting for.